Jaren Jackson Jr. might look like the perfect blockbuster addition for the Pelicans, a defensive anchor, a floor spacing big, but dig a little bit deeper and you'll see why this trade could actually set New Orleans back, not push them forward. It's Friday's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider Credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with you on this Friday, and we're going to look at maybe the most interesting guy on the trade market, reportedly on the trade market, and that is Jaren Jackson Jr., the big man from Memphis. On paper, perfect addition for New Orleans. You compare him alongside Zion Williamson, you compare him alongside Derik Queen. Once you dig a little bit deeper, I think this could be one of the worst moves that New Orleans could make. We're going to break it all down, the good, the bad, the salary cap part of it too, in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. Before tip-off, check the FanDuel app and see what's dropping during NBA Happy Hour every Friday from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the number one Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 12,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well, and become an everydayer. It means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. You can also watch us on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, the number one sports podcast network. Jaren Jackson Jr., big man from the Memphis Grizzlies, seems like a perfect addition for New Orleans. 6'10". He shoots threes. He kind of rebounds. Not really. But he spaces the court. He can be a little bit of an offensive hub at times. He just checks a lot of the boxes for New Orleans. So should they go and get him? The Grizzlies sound like they're going to blow it up. We've heard John Morant is firmly on the trade block. And then we've seen reports that, people actually want Jaren Jackson Jr. from Memphis. This is a former defensive player of the year. He's a 3-time all-defensive team. This is the guy, right? He's that weak side rim protector, switchable big with shooting ability. He seems like he fits next to Zion Williamson or Derik Queen. This is the guy you want, like truthfully. Defensively, Jaren Jackson Jr. makes up for Queen or Zion's defensive limitations. And while giving you shooting, that's exactly the type of big you're looking for. He also blocks shots. As someone who averages almost 2 blocks per game. The year he won Defensive Player of the Year, he averaged 3 blocks per game back in 22-23. He's a 2-time All-Star as well. Boxes check, available check, all of that here. And when you look at hypothetical trades for him, I'm not going to go deep into like what it would be. You would essentially need to send out someone like either Zion Williamson or Jordan Poole plus something else, filler, and then 2 to 3 first-round picks. A swap can be one of those as well. It wouldn't take, I think to get a 2-time All-Star, former Defensive Player of the Year, and the type of player that fits next to your unique big men, whichever one you kind of decide to keep and build around, and in this case, it would work around Zion Williamson or Derik Queen, but we'll use Derik Queen for this example. That's the type of guy you got to go and get. I've long talked about, the everydayers have heard me say this recently, adding that other big man when you're building around a big man is the toughest part. They've long needed an Aaron Gordon level player alongside Zion Williamson, and there's just not a ton of those kind of guys. We've even done a show about ones that could be good options to fit that sort of role. And now you get like a center version of it, a power forward version of it. And that's what you could potentially get in Jaren Jackson Jr. So if this team wants to be competitive, fixing the center spot, the front court spot, seems like a very smart thing to do, right? And yeah, think about a lineup of Jeremiah Fears, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Derik Queen. That has got to be one of the more interesting lineups I think that the Pelicans could put out there. You have multiple creators in Queen and Fears, even a little bit in Jaren Jackson Jr., even a little bit in Herb Jones. Trey Murphy has become a bit of a creator for others too. You have Herb Jones as a cutter, as an off-ball guy. Same with Trey Murphy, who I do think is his best as a finisher. You don't need Fears to dominate the ball in those kinds of lineups. And defensively, I think that lineup's good, particularly assuming that Derik Queen shows growth to be able to kind of hang with certain centers down low. You have length, you have versatility, and this lineup would force an absolute ton of turnovers. They'd also contest basically every shot that's going up. Offensively, you got a big man that makes sense next to Derik Queen. That's half the battle here. They were never able to put a good court spacing shooter alongside Zion Williamson. And while I think there's long-term questions about Jaren Jackson Jr. as an outside shooter, this is someone, who kind of has done it. Like, I don't think he's elite by any means, but this year on 4.6 attempts, he's shooting 36%. I'm sorry, I'm coughing here. Last year in Memphis, he shot 37.5% on 5.3 attempts. Year before that was 32%, but we're not going to look at that. For his career, in 8 years in the league here, this is someone who is shooting 35% on almost 5 attempts per game. His second year in the league was basically 40% on 6.5 attempts. He can be that court spacing big man, I think, and that's kind of the unicorn, the dream to try and go and get, let alone one that also can block some shots. So I do think this lineup would work. Like, I don't know. That sounds fun to me. That sounds like a really fun lineup to me and kind of exactly what New Orleans needs. You hopefully will get some shooting in Fears. You will hopefully get some shooting in Herb Jones, but you have an elite shooter in Trey Murphy, a court spacing big man, an offensive hub in Derik Queen. You have secondary creation in Fears, Trey, a little bit less so in Herb Jones, and a little bit less so in Jaren Jackson Jr. Seems like it can work, right? The big thing when it comes to defense for Queen is you don't want him guarding out there on the perimeter. You really saw that in the Denver Nuggets game where Jamal Murray just torched him. But if you put Jaren Jackson Jr. in that situation, the Pelicans would win that game. It would all of a sudden look completely different. That's why this makes, I think on paper, a ton of sense. But then you dig deeper. And there are one or two huge issues. I want to look at those, particularly when it comes to rebounding. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And that has a bigger impact than just you need some rebounding. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by DoorDash. The season is heating up, maybe not for the Pelicans, and DoorDash has a way to keep fans in their bag the whole way through. So whether you're watching highlights, the tunnel fits, or just your favorite player, DoorDash makes the entire season more fun because every player has their bag, and with DoorDash, fans have one too. DoorDash keeps your snacks stocked, your gear fresh, and your watch party vibes absolutely on point. There's nights when the Pelicans are just going to stress you out or frankly make you sad. Let DoorDash become your post-game therapy. Sometimes you just need that dessert right now. We're all feeling that right now here in New Orleans. And those late night interviews where you hear James Borrego talking great things about Trey Murphy, you suddenly need chips at midnight. DoorDash is built for exactly that. So from tip-off to overtime, stay in your bag and order on DoorDash. Get snacks, drinks, gear, whatever gets you through the season, delivered right to your door. DoorDash in your bag all season long. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen. Today and every day, we are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Become an everydayer. Means you listen Monday through Friday. And for you everydayers out there, go check out the new Everydayer Club. You're going to get access to ad-free audio. No, none of the ads that are in the show. And it's compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every other major podcast app. It's going to mean you can get through the shows quicker. You also get an invite to a members-only Locked On Everydayer Club Discord server, a group chat just for Locked On Pelicans. and also our NBA one as well. So connect with other fans. So tap the link in the show notes to learn more. Jaren Jackson Jr. makes a lot of sense, I think, on paper for the Pelicans. A lot of sense. And if they are intent on making a move being key in this, yeah, go and get Jaren Jackson Jr. Look, at least you won't be boring, and there's something to be said for that, I think. But I do think there are big concerns when it comes to Jaren Jackson Jr. and what it would do to the makeup of this team. And then what would you do going forward? And when you factor in, you're giving up more future draft capital. That's going to be a problem here, because then you're going to really need to make this work. And it's not as easy as it sounds. So here's why Jaren Jackson Jr. just wouldn't work. And that's defensive rebounding. He's not a good rebounder. For his career, his defensive rebounding rate is I'll round up and give it to him. It's 16%. That's just not going to get it done. Derik Queen is much better than that, 24.8. Carlo Makovich has a better defensive rebounding rate than Jaren Jackson Jr. does. Yves Missi is slightly better. Trey Murphy is at 16%. So if you add another 16% defensive rebounder to this squad, does that change anything? The answer is no. They're 27th out of 30 in defensive rebounding rate right now. You need to get better on that side of the ball, and that is not something that Jaren Jackson Jr. is going to do for this team. Not at all, not in the slightest. You need to pair him with other bigs that can kind of do a lot of that stuff. There's a reason they drafted Zach Edey to really help with that. There's a reason why Memphis historically has played Jaren Jackson Jr. more at the 4 than the 5, and also paired him with another rebounding big man that can handle a lot of that work, whether it is Zach Edey, whether it is a guy like Steven Adams as well, is someone that they've really used in that capacity too. And in the years that they haven't, they have struggled and not been a particularly good team. You are not going to be a good defensive rebounding team unless you have another elite defensive rebounder alongside him. That year that he won Defensive Player of the Year, it was Steven Adams holding down the defensive glass. And even then, Memphis Grizzlies were only 18th in defensive rebounding rate. But that was enough because you have Steven Adams doing an absolute ton of work there. You're going to need a similar situation here. While Derik Queen is showing some flashes of being a good defensive rebounder, he's not a possession ender, at least yet. And that might take another year or two for him to really come online in that capacity. So if you trade away future draft capital and you're going to be a bad defensive rebounding team and you're going to absolutely bleed and give up a ton of second chance points, to me, that's not just a minor issue. That is a real limiting factor to how you would build your team. If it's one of those things where it's like, well, we don't have our draft picks, so we can't be bad at this sort of thing because it's going to stop us from winning games, that is not a direction that you should go down. You look at it, you look at other teams that kind of run some finesse bigs out there, or skilled bigs, let's call them. Jonas Valanciunas being more of a bruiser, less of a skilled big. Same for Steven Adams. You look at some teams that have those type of guys out there, and a team like Boston has done it in the past with Al Horford and others, but you have elite rebounding at other positions. Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum are elite rebounders. You've seen the Oklahoma City Thunder, where you have basically just Chet Holmgren kind of get it from everywhere else at other positions. Even the Cleveland Cavaliers run kind of two bigs that don't have the skill but are bruisers down low in Jared Allen and Evan Mobley. And so they control the boards, but their offense bogs down because of it. It's trying to find that right balance, and that is not an easy thing to do. So you can mitigate this, but it does, I think, then change entirely your team building process. That starting lineup of Fears, Herb, Trey, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Queen might get crushed on the defensive glass. So you could swap out Jeremiah Fears for a point guard with more height and a better rebounder, a Josh Giddey kind of player, or ironically, a Dyson Daniels. but you're also going to lose a bunch of creation. You're going to lose some rim pressure on the offensive side. And also, what's the point of kind of discussing this? Because you just drafted Jeremiah Fears 7th overall to be your point guard of the future. He's not someone that they're going to just, okay, we got Jaren Jackson Jr., so let's swap him out. You could go with an elite rebounding big off the bench. That's something that's been on my mind about kind of building a team around that starting five. But it isn't, the cure-all, and you would need to find the right one. I was thinking a lot about Jonas Valanciunas, kind of going through this like thought experiment here with Jaren Jackson Jr. and bringing him off the bench. But would that work? When you put him out there, your offense is just going to bog down. That's not the type of guy that, you're really looking for here. And it's going to kind of then change the way you play defense, because while Jaren Jackson Jr. can switch on the perimeter, you put him, Jonas Valanciunas, or a big that can't, and Queen together, you have to change your defensive coverage and go with a different one, assuming you're sticking with the switching scheme. And that's you can't just run like two different things out there. So that creates a problem. So this starting lineup of Fears, Herb, Trey, JJJ, and Queen feels at times like a more situational lineup, one that wants to push the pace, one that doesn't want to, and do a couple of other things, that it would be your default starting lineup, even if I'm still really, really intrigued by it. So can you build a team around that? You're going to need some pretty elite or very good to elite rebounding guards, rebounding wings off the bench. And again, we're talking bench players, so finding guys that have 4 or 5 tools out there is easier said than done. And so that's part of the problem. If you also want to be, when it comes to Jaren Jackson Jr., and say you go with that starting lineup, how do you cover for that defensive rebounding deficiencies? You gang rebound. Everyone goes for the ball. But when you do that, you're sacrificing getting out and running in transition. And I mean, every coach says this, but everyone's like, we want to play fast. We want to get out and run. And truthfully, the Pelicans in the half-court offense isn't good, so they need to get out and run and do all of that. Are you going to be able to do that as much when you have Jaren Jackson Jr. and Derik Queen out there, when you need everybody else providing defensive rebounding? I mean, maybe. You've seen Memphis have a pretty fast pace with Jaren Jackson Jr. and some of those slower bigs, so maybe you can still do that. But I think you're going to struggle with it a good bit. And that's a big part of the problem in trading for him. If you're not able to solve that, this team is bad all of a sudden, and you don't have your first round picks in the future. And we're kind of right back where we are in this season, where you're losing games and it doesn't matter anymore. And that's not a situation where anyone wants to be in. Wins or losses you want to be rooting for one or the other. Right now, this season, it doesn't matter if the team wins or loses, right? Like, the wins are fun. I would like to see them do that. Don't get me wrong. But ultimately, does it matter? And the answer to that is no. The answer to that is no right now. The outcome of the game here, who cares? Doesn't matter. If they had their draft pick, we'd be rooting for losses. And in some weird way, it's kind of fun to do that when we're all in the boat together, even though I'm sick of it. But you can't keep putting yourself in this sort of position. And seeing very real limitations around adding Jaren Jackson Jr. that are not the easiest to try and address from a roster building perspective. We'll get into the salary cap in a minute, and that's a big part of it. That makes it difficult, I think, to really feel like Jaren Jackson Jr. is the right move for New Orleans to make. That's why I said, sounds great on paper, and then you really start to think about it, and I'm interested. I'm intrigued, I promise. And then you think more, and you think a little bit more. This literally kept me up last night. I woke up in the middle of the night with some thoughts on Jaren Jackson Jr. I'm getting out my phone to write some notes down and stuff. Yeah, I don't think it totally would work. And for what you would need to give up to get him, and I don't mean the player, right? Jordan Poole, whatever. It's the picks. And the Pelicans can't keep giving away, and it's giving away, future first round picks like that. And that's going to be a big factor into all this. That one, there could be a bidding war for Jaren Jackson Jr. So coming up next, the other reason it doesn't work, and it factors into this, right? We just said it's going to be difficult to build a team around that starting lineup. You're going to need flexibility to do it. I don't know if you would have any flexibility if you were to add Jaren Jackson Jr. to this team. Let's break that down. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. We're looking at the salary cap side of things. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. Fridays already feel different during basketball season, and FanDuel is making them even better. Every Friday night before the games tip off, FanDuel gives you a new way to kick off the weekend with every NBA happy hour. It's tonight. NBA Happy Hour is your official pregame, a limited time window where special offers drop right inside the FanDuel app before the action starts. So Fridays from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern are appointment viewing with NBA Happy Hour. Open the FanDuel app during Happy Hour and you're always going to find something new, boosts, bonuses, or surprises. And it's easy to check the weekly special before tip-off and make a move before the window closes. And the timing is just perfect, right before the games, right before the weekend starts. Just add some extra energy to your Friday night basketball without overthinking it. So before tip-off, check the FanDuel app and see what's dropping during NBA Happy Hour every Friday from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern. A little basketball, a little action, and a whole lot of Friday energy. That's NBA Happy Hour only on FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday. We're here Monday through Friday, the number one Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Join over 12,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. Become an everydayer. Don't just be an everydayer of the show. Join the Everydayer Club. You get ad-free audio. You can click the link in the description down below. So let's look at the financials behind adding Jaren Jackson Jr. You're already going to need to do a lot of work to kind of reshape your roster and change your roster, and you're not going to have draft picks to do it, so you better have some sort of financial flexibility to be able to make this happen. You're not once you add Jaren Jackson Jr. to this team. And it's interesting to see how the years line up with all of this. Jaren Jackson Jr. signed an extension this offseason. It's why he's now eligible to be traded like this week. Making $35 million this year, trading for him, adding him onto the team, like that's no big deal whatsoever. You can easily pull that off. It's what happens with his contract over the next 4 years, really 3 years, that is like, wait, this could be bad. He makes $49 million next year, $50.5 million the year after that, and then $52 million in 28 and 29. All of a sudden, your team is expensive. You have two rookies that would be in your starting lineup, and that's going to help you. But the end of 28-29, Derik Queen is up for an extension. Jeremiah Fears. Trey Murphy's deal runs through 28-29. And then Jaren Jackson Jr. Now, he has a player option for 29-30 at $53.5 million, but he would almost certainly be looking for another long-term deal before that. Can you afford to pay all of those guys? And given, the answer is probably no at that point in time. And maybe it's at that point Jaren Jackson Jr. is kind of faded out of your rotation and isn't going to be the guy that you want anymore. But he's only 26. You wouldn't be trading for him and being like, in 3 years, we're not going to have him. 3-4 years away from now is a long time. So, things could change, but you'd need to pay all of these guys again. And that's going to be very difficult for New Orleans to do. By also adding his salary onto your books right now, this season, you'd almost certainly go into the luxury tax unless you do some salary dumps. You'd need to find a way to get out from Zion's contract, and with the way that he's playing right now and the amount of games that he's playing, assuming he's not included in this trade, because I don't think the Memphis Grizzlies would want him included in this trade, I think they would maybe have more of an interest in Jordan Poole because you can get out of his deal sooner. Zion's guaranteeing his deal right now. You're not going to be able to just get out from him and cut him and waive him anymore if he keeps playing, particularly playing on back-to-backs. Look, almost the first time ever in Zion's career, he's playing on back-to-backs, and it's to the year when his contract isn't guaranteed next season. If you think that's a coincidence, he's aware of what he needs to do to guarantee that deal, and seems like he's trying, which, look, that's why you create a deal like that, to incentivize him to play, so maybe the deal is working. But if you're trying to get off of that contract, well, it's going to be tougher. I don't think that's as easy as you think. The reason you trade Zion Williamson right now is you're probably not going to be able to get out from his deal in the foreseeable future. So that's part of the problem, and you don't want it to guarantee and have it just you be stuck with him then. Let someone else deal with that kind of problem. So you add $49 million out of the books, which is going to be a significant jump from the $35 he's making this year and what Jordan Poole would be making next year. You have a problem all of a sudden, and your team is going to be in the luxury tax and be in the luxury tax for 3-4 years unless you make some dramatic cost-cutting moves. You can't just dump Zion. You have to find a way to get off of that, but you're going to bring salary back, and you're going to need to pay other guys too. There's almost no way to do this without going into the luxury tax. And even if they want to go into the luxury tax, let's say they do, that's great. But you're going to run into the problem of how do you add more to it? You're going to be pushing the second apron by adding Jaren Jackson Jr. Even if you get rid of Jordan Poole this year. Jordan Poole makes $34 million next year. Jaren Jackson makes $49. You're deep into the luxury tax. You're pushing the second apron. You blown past the first apron at that point. You're not going to be able to add all of those pieces that you want. And if you don't add those pieces, you still won't be as good as you could be. And then all of a sudden you're not good. You don't have future draft picks, and you've just got an expensive roster that's not winning games or doing what you need. So if that's going to be the case, don't trade for Jaren Jackson Jr. If you're not going to pay the luxury tax, don't trade for Jaren Jackson Jr. That's where this starts to fall apart. We can debate the on-court stuff. You could talk to me about the rebounding, how you could deal with that for what it would mean for the offense and other things. Sure. It all falls apart when it's like, hey, luxury tax for 3-4 years, right? And the lack of team building that you would have from that. And we've seen when you have an expensive roster that just doesn't work, you'll lose a bunch of games. You need your draft picks, and you wouldn't have them because you included them in a Jaren Jackson Jr. trade. That's why Jaren Jackson Jr. sounds great on paper, doesn't work in theory. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments down below. So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Enjoy the games this week, and we'll be back with y'all on Monday to recap them all and keep talking about what the Pelicans are going to do leading up to the NBA's trade deadline. See y'all next time.